Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to recognize modulation in a piece of music. So just to be very clear about what that word means, modulate means to change key. Now, often music can sound a little bit tedious if it all sticks in the same key for too long. Often music can sound a bit disturbing if it's always changing key as well. So there's a little bit of a balancing act that's required here. How long does a composer stay in one key before moving on? How often do we change key? It's one thing that a composer or an improviser needs to think about. But when we're looking at a piece of music, can we see modulations? So if you're trying to analyze music, how do you know when the key changes and how that happens and all the rest of it? But if you're trying to hear it as well, how can you perceive modulation orally? Can you hear when it changes key? And if you can hear that it changes key, well, how can you hear which key it's changed to? That's a bit more tricky sometimes. But anyway, I've just put together 8 bars of a piece of music I've made up for the purpose, and we'll begin by having a listen to it. And in the first instance, just see what happens. Can you hear when the keys change? If you can hear that independently of looking at the music, well, that might be useful, but you might want to look at the music as well and think, did I hear a key change there? And then do I see anything that makes me think, oh yeah, I can see why that key change has happened. So the home key of this piece of music is E flat major. So there's the tonic chord of E flat major. Have a listen to the 8 bars. So there we are. Now it started in E flat major and it finished in E flat major. But let's have a look and see what's going on and associate that with what we're hearing. As you can see, I've sort of organized this piece into 2-bar phrases. Now, when you look at the whole of the first bar, one big clue is there are no accidentals. We're just sticking with chords that belong to the key signature. So if we're looking at these chords, well, what are we doing? We're using chord 1, and then we've got chord 1 in first inversion, we've got chord 4, we've got chord 1 in first inversion again. So nothing unusual happening there. However, when we look at the second bar, well, we immediately see that there's an A natural going on there. So what might this A natural be telling us? Might not be telling us anything about a change of key. It might just be what we call a chromatic note. It might be a little chromatic decoration that's just using a note that doesn't belong to the key. Or it might be something to do with a chromatic chord. So that's a chord that maybe uses accidentals that don't belong to the key, but is kind of acting and functioning inside the key as a way of kind of decorating it. So we've got to kind of puzzle out what that means. However, if you think it might be doing something to the key, well, one thing you can think about is that we've got an A natural. What impact is that having on this key signature? Well, if we've got A natural, it means we're eliminating that last flat, doesn't it? So we're left with B flat and E flat. So you might think, well, which key has B flat and E flat in it? And that could be the key of B flat major or the key of G minor. Now, if you're not sure about keys, the circle of fifths is a great place to go as a means of finding out exactly how the keys work. But if you're kind of in tune with keys, you'll see the logic of what I'm saying. So could it be that at this point, that A natural is bringing about a modulation either to B flat major or to G minor? It's a very strong indication, all the more so because it's happening on the penultimate chord of the phrase. So the last two chords of a phrase in conventional kind of Western harmony will give us a cadence. So it's going to go 5-1 or 4-1 or something to 5 or 5 to 6. So these are our standard kind of cadence formulas. So it could well be that that's something that's happening here. If it's going to G minor, we may well expect to see F sharps as well, because in a minor scale, you often raise the 7th degree of the scale, unless you're working in the natural minor. But when we're using harmony in the kind of Western tradition, as it were, we often raise the 7th in line with the harmonic minor scale, or even in line with the ascending melodic minor scale. It's interesting, isn't it, that here we've got F natural, F natural. So it's looking less like G minor and more like B flat major. Okay, now then, when we look at this final chord here, it's worth asking ourselves, well, what is that chord? B flat, D, F. So that's looking like a tonic chord of B flat major, isn't it? So I think we're getting there, aren't we? Because this is looking like chord 1 in B flat major. The previous chord is F, A natural C, and that's looking like a chord 5 in B flat major, isn't it? Okay, the previous chord has still got A flat in it, so that's sort of belonging to the original key. So that's looking like a chord 2 in the original key of E flat major. But from this point, we seem to be modulating to B flat major. What's B flat major in relation to the original key? It's the dominant key, isn't it? So let's think about this first phrase again. We're in E flat major and the last two chords go 5 to 1 in the dominant key of B flat major. So can we hear the modulation on the last two chords? And if so, can we begin to feel that the tonic has moved from E flat to B flat, the dominant key? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so here's the first phrase. Now, hopefully you can hear, as soon as that A natural comes in, there's a real kind of shift. Oh, we're going somewhere. So that second bar, we start with that chord, that F minor chord that belongs to the original key, chord 2. And then we hear this A natural. That's the note that shifts us into the new key. So we've definitely gone into B flat major, the dominant key, and we hear this as the new tonic key. Okay, well, where are we going next? Well, if we're in B flat major, well, the next chord is an E flat major chord. So that's chord 4 in B flat major. You could also say, well, it's chord 1 in E flat major if we're going back to E flat. So let's just sort of make a note that it's also that, because that might just be something that's relevant. But what's our next big clue? There's a D flat in that soprano part. Now, what might that be telling us? Again, it might be some of these chromatic alterations or chromatic chords, chromatic notes, embellishments, whatever, or it might be telling us something about key. Think about D flat for a moment in relation to the original key signature. Well, we had 3 flats, B flat, E flat, A flat. Isn't it interesting that the next flat in the sequence of flats is D flat? So if we had a 4th flat, it would be D flat. So that's interesting. It's a neighbouring key, isn't it? And if we have 4 flats, well, that's telling us we're in A flat major or F minor. Okay, I wonder what it is. Well, if we've got a kind of D flat here, one useful thing is to have a look at the next chord and think, what's going on after that? Well, the next chord, interestingly, is a chord of A flat major. Okay, so that's sort of suggesting that it's A flat major rather than F minor. If it was F minor, same trick as we talked about a moment ago, you might expect the 7th degree to be raised. That would be E flat being raised to E natural. Well, look at the tenor part. 2 repeated E flat, so it's very solidly E flat rather than E natural, isn't it? So it's looking as if by the time we get to here, we've got chord 1 in A flat major. So if we start reading in A flat major, because once we've got D flat there, we must be thinking in A flat major. We can't be thinking in B flat major or E flat major anymore, can we? So this is looking like a chord 4 in A flat major in first inversion. And then it's moving pretty quickly because the second half of this is now looking like a 5/7 in first inversion in A flat major. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? That's where we're moving. So now we've heard that, we've finished in B flat major in bar 2. Then in bar 3, there's an E flat major chord, but then D flat, going to a tonic chord of A flat major. So can you hear that modulation? Then it's kind of confirmed with another A flat major chord. So then we think, okay, maybe there's now going to be a cadence in A flat major. It might be doing something like this. And that would settle us in A flat major. Actually, it doesn't do that. Now this is interesting. So from bar 3, we go to A flat major. We confirm A flat major. But then in bar 4, D natural. Can you hear another modulation? That D natural seems to be pulling us somewhere else, doesn't it? So it's this note. Now, this is a little bit harder to spot when you're kind of looking at the music because, you know, when we looked at the earlier modulations, we could see A natural, that was telling us something. We could see D natural, D flat rather, that's telling us something. Now we've got D natural, it's not sort of flagging up with a natural sign in shining lights. But we have got to think, haven't we, that when we said D flat was introduced there, that added a flat to our key signature, that made us think A flat major. But of course, once we see D natural here, we're thinking, well, we've cancelled that D flat again. We're going back to 3 flats, aren't we? And then we look at this chord and we think, well, that's a chord of E flat major. So it looks as if, while this phrase kind of moves to A flat major in bar 3, by the time we get to bar 4, we've gone back, haven't we, to E flat major. So this is all good fun, isn't it? So we've got chord 1 in A flat major at the end of bar 3. We could also say that this is what we call a pivot chord, a chord that's common to the key you're leaving and to the key you're joining. So if we're now thinking in E flat major, well, this is also chord 4. So then what's really going on is we're now thinking in E flat major. We finish on a chord 1 in E flat major. We've got chord 5 here, and then the soprano adds a little 7th in there. You see this note here that is a 7th. It's just a passing note or a passing tone, but it turns the previous chord 5 into a 5/7. And just to add to the fun, I've got a 4/3 suspension in the tenor part there. That's the 4/3 suspension. Now, when you have a suspension, it has to be prepared. That's where it's prepared. It has to be sounded. It has to be resolved. P belongs to the prevailing chord. R belongs to the prevailing chord. S is dissonant. P must be the same note as S. S has to resolve to R by step, normally downwards. So that's definitely a suspension that's going on there. Okay, so you can now see that we've gone back to E flat major. So that second phrase, the modulation to A flat major, is a bit temporary because then we come out of it with a pivot chord and then this D natural pushes us back to E flat major. So can you hear what's going on? Can you hear the modulations so far from the beginning? E flat major, B flat major, the dominant key, A flat major, which is of course the subdominant key, and then back home to E flat major. Okay, so you can see what's going on there. I should just note that the A flat is the subdominant key there, and that we're now in fact coming back to the tonic key. Whoa, will the excitement have no end? Well, where are we going next? Well, we now seem to have a C minor chord coming up. That's interesting. Well, in E flat major, that's chord 6, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It could mean that we're just continuing in E flat major. But of course, on the next chord, there's a B natural. Now, that's a funny one, isn't it? What's B natural doing there? Because when you look at the original key signature, if we've got B natural, we're eliminating the first flat. But we still seem to have E flat and A flat kind of lurking about the place. You know, there's E flats there, aren't there? You know, we've got A flat here. So if you're missing an early flat, but you've still got the later flats, that's nearly always suggesting a minor key. So there's a useful tip. Okay, now if we've got this accidental here, one thing to think about is this. Could it be the raised seventh in a minor key? Because as we were saying earlier, often the seventh is raised when you're in a minor key. So could that be what's happening to us here? Because if it is, B natural is the seventh in a key of C. And if we're thinking minor, C minor? And is C minor a likely prospect? Well, with a key signature of 3 flats, we're either in E flat major or we're in C minor. So, C minor. The evidence is growing, is it not, for the key of C minor? And if we have a look at it, this is looking like 5 in C minor, isn't it? Okay, now the previous chord is what we call our pivot chord, because it's 6 in the key of E flat major, but it's also 1 in the key of C minor. So then we go from there to a dominant chord of C minor, and in fact it's in its first inversion because that B natural's in the bass. Okay, there's a little bit of decoration going on. I mean, this is an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbor tone. This is a passing note or a passing tone. In this case, it happens to turn the chord into a 5/7, so we might just make a note of that. And then where are we going? Well, then we've got chord 1 in C minor, we've got chord 5/7 in C minor, little sort of decoration going on in the melody there, but let's not worry too much about that. And then we're going to chord 1. So you notice some of these modulations are really brief, aren't they? Like the end of the first phrase, we just had 2 chords that went wham bang into the dominant key of B flat. In bar 3, we had a couple of chords that went boom straight into A flat major, back again to E flat major. Now in this phrase, what are we doing? We're going to C minor, and then we're staying there for a bit. So some of these modulations are really late and very quick. Some modulations happen earlier and extend for a longer period. So that's what I'm trying to give examples of here. So this one is going on for a longer period. So let's see if we can hear from the beginning to that point. So E flat major, modulation to the dominant B flat major, modulation to the subdominant A flat major, coming back to E flat major, pivot chord, taking us to C minor with the B natural, and that's confirmed with a cadence in C minor. Okay, now as soon as you look at the last phrase, you think, I can't see any accidentals anywhere. And we've been talking about B naturals, but it's not long, is it, before we start seeing B flats back with us again. And again, these are sort of some of the invisible signs, a little bit like that one we saw earlier, where you don't see an accidental, but in fact you realize that that B natural world that we've been in has disappeared, because now we're back with B flat. So what have we done? We've reinstated the key signature. We haven't got any alterations to note, so we're probably in a major key rather than a minor key. So if we're in a major key with 3 flats, we must have gone home to E flat major. So let's have a look and see what's going on. Because if we're in the key of E flat major, well, then this is chord 4. Now, if it's an A flat major chord, of course, we were in the key of C minor, weren't we? So it's also a chord 6 in C minor. So this could be another one of these pivot chords, couldn't it? Or you could even argue that this chord is the pivot chord because that's 1 in C minor, but it's 6 in E flat major. So, you know, sometimes a pivot chord could be this one, could be the next one, but you know, you can see what's going on anyway. And then very quickly, just to notate all this, this is a dominant 7th in its last inversion. Here's a tonic chord in first inversion, tonic chord root position, supertonic 7th first inversion, and then a dominant chord and a tonic chord, all in E flat major. So from bar 6, we finished off in C minor, and then back to E flat major and a cadence in E flat major. So I'm hoping now that you've had some kind of opportunity to hear these modulations. I mean, that's the most important thing, isn't it? To get your aural skills working for you really well musically, but also that you can see them, see how some of them are quick and deadly and happening very late. Some of them are over a more extended period. And just to kind of get some sense of, well, which keys are these? And C minor, of course, what we were talking about earlier on, is the relative minor of E flat major. So all these keys make sense. Going to the dominant, going to the subdominant, going to the relative minor, they're all closely related keys. So let's put the whole thing together, see if you can see what we've been talking about with the chord analysis and the key analysis, and listen to these modulations and really get to hear them.